Wait, you said you just wanted me to stay quiet, right? I took off my coat. I am not screaming. Just take whatever you want and open that door. Please, just unlock the door.
South Korea, the Jidong neighborhood in the city of Suwon. The year is 2012. Inside a ground-floor studio apartment, a sequence of events is unfolding that will alter the national understanding of extreme physical violence. This is not an incident of sudden passion or a robbery gone wrong. What occurs behind this single locked door is an exercise in total physical control, resulting in the systematic destruction of a human being. The environment is entirely mundane, a small living space and an attached bathroom with tiled floors. Yet, within these few square meters, the precise mechanics of a homicide are being executed with the steady, measured pace of a factory assembly line. Hours earlier, the industrial outskirts of the city were settling into a quiet Sunday night on April 1. Kwok, 28 years old, stepped off a local transit bus. She was a contract employee at a nearby cell phone parts manufacturing plant, finishing a long, demanding shift. She earned a modest wage of 1.7 to 1.8 million won per month. Despite the low income, she operated as the primary financial pillar of her household. She carried the responsibility of paying off her father's debts and funding her younger brother's education. Kwok began her usual walk home. She navigated the narrow residential alleys of Paldalgu. The physical layout of this district consists of a dense grid of low-rise brick buildings, concrete walls, and narrow streets that restrict line of sight. Her route took her past Jidong Elementary School and the Motgal Playground. She moved through the darkness, putting one foot in front of the other, focused entirely on reaching the front door of her residence. A man was waiting along her route. His name was Oh-Won Chun. He was a 42-year-old migrant worker. Born as an ethnic Korean in Inner Mongolia, China, he had crossed the border years earlier to work as a day laborer on construction sites across South Korea. He possessed a significant physical advantage, standing 1.78 meters tall and weighing 83 kilograms. Earlier that evening, Oh had been consuming alcohol inside his rented room. He stepped outside to dispose of his trash. Instead of returning indoors, he made a calculated decision to procure a woman for a sexual assault. He positioned his body behind a concrete utility pole situated approximately 50 meters from his apartment. Utilizing the physical structure to block his profile from pedestrians approaching from the south, he stood stationary in the blind spot of the streetlights. He watched the alleyway and waited. At approximately 10:40 p.m., Kwok walked into his direct line of sight. She passed the utility pole. Oh moved. Stepping out from the shadows, he lunged directly at her. He used his mask to disrupt her center of gravity, shoving her forcefully onto the hard pavement. Gripping her clothing, he pulled her laterally across the asphalt surface. He navigated her body through the open doorway of his ground floor unit. The entire physical sequence, from the initial contact on the street to the closing of the apartment door, spanned exactly 13 to 14 seconds on a nearby security camera timer.
You are making too much noise. I am not going to hurt you if you just listen to me. Sit on the floor and do exactly as I say.
The heavy metal door of the studio apartment shut and the lock engaged. Kwok was now contained within a physical space measuring only a few square meters, consisting of a main room and an attached bathroom. Oh retrieved a roll of industrial packing tape. He stripped lengths of the adhesive material and applied them to her wrists, binding her limbs to restrict her motor functions. He issued verbal commands for her to remove her clothing. In an attempt to de-escalate the immediate physical threat, Kwok feigned compliance. She removed her outer jacket and placed it onto the flat surface of the bed. Oh momentarily diverted his attention. Stepping out of the main room and walking into the adjacent bathroom, Kwok recognized the shift in his proximity. She immediately moved to the internal wooden door connecting the main room to the hallway, pushed it closed, and engaged the locking mechanism. She was temporarily separated from her captor by a single pane of wood. At 10:50 p.m., she extracted her mobile phone and dialed 112, the national emergency number. She provided verbal geographic markers into the receiver, stating that she was being sexually assaulted by an unknown male in a house located between Jidong Elementary School and the Matgal playground. Oh realized the internal door was secured. He returned to the threshold and applied blunt force to the wooden frame. The locking mechanism failed. The door splintered and opened. Kwok dropped her cellular device onto the floorboards. The call did not disconnect. For the next 7 minutes and 36 seconds, the active microphone captured acoustic data of the ongoing assault. The audio profile consisted of wood breaking, the unspooling of adhesive tape, blunt physical trauma, and vocalizations of extreme physical distress from Kwok. Inside the room, Oh evaluated his parameters. He possessed 7 million won in savings, accumulated through years of manual labor. He recognized that an arrest for attempted sexual assault would result in imprisonment, deportation, and the confiscation of this capital. The preservation of his financial assets superseded the preservation of human life. Retrieving a heavy metal wrench, he executed 2 downward strikes to Kwok's cranium. She fell to the floor. Oh positioned his hands around her neck and compressed her airway until respiration ceased. Death was achieved by 5 a.m. on April 2nd. Once he confirmed she was deceased, Oh gripped the body and pulled the mass across the floor, crossing the threshold into the small, tiled bathroom. Rather than attempting to flee the building or hide the remains in a secondary location, he initiated a systematic process of dismemberment. Utilizing standard kitchen knives, he worked methodically to separate the dermal and muscle tissue from the skeletal frame. The soft tissue was then sectioned into uniform pieces of equal dimension. For 6 hours, he performed this manual labor. He did not exhibit physiological reactions such as vomiting or panic during this prolonged exposure to the remains. By the time daylight illuminated the exterior of the building, the bathroom floor contained 358 distinct pieces of flesh and 29 separated bones. Oh organized the biological material, dividing the uniform pieces and packing them into 14 separate plastic garbage and travel bags. After tying the tops of the bags closed, he aligned them on the floor of the washroom. The process was executed with absolute mechanical precision, reducing a human being into measured, transportable units, waiting in the silence of the tiled space. The individual responsible for the 14 bags on the floor was born decades earlier and hundreds of miles away. Oh Wan-chun, legally documented as Wu Yuan-chun in Chinese records, entered the world on November 20, 1970. His birthplace was the Tianguang village in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region of China. He belonged to the ethnic Korean minority population residing within Chinese borders. This demographic, known as Joseonjok, maintains linguistic and historical ties to the Korean peninsula, but often occupies a marginalized socioeconomic space within both Chinese and South Korean societies. During his developmental years in Tianguang, Oh exhibited a distinctly small physical frame. He possessed poor muscular development and lower than average height compared to his peers. This physical discrepancy rendered him a primary target for repeated physical assaults within the rural school system. Older and larger students subjected him to systemic bullying and physical domination. Behavioral psychologists analyzing this early data note the absence of a protective support structure in his environment. The prolonged exposure to physical abuse did not generate empathy for other victims. Instead, it established a foundational understanding of human interaction based entirely on a hierarchy of physical force. Oh terminated his formal education at the elementary school level. He transitioned immediately into manual agricultural labor in his local village. Entering early adulthood, Oh accumulated a documented criminal history in China. His police records indicate arrests for physical assault, illegal gambling, and document forgery. During these encounters with the Chinese judicial system, Oh experienced extreme coercive measures. During subsequent interrogations years later, he explicitly stated that local Chinese law enforcement officers administered severe beatings to extract information and enforce compliance. This specific environmental feedback loop reinforced his internal cognitive bias. The state utilized physical violence to exert absolute control over his person. Therefore, in his psychological framework, inflicting physical trauma was the standardized, accepted mechanism for problem-solving and asserting dominance over subordinate individuals. Seeking higher wages to support a wife and a son born in 2002, Oh utilized his ethnic heritage to secure legal entry into South Korea. In 2007, he acquired a specific work visa allocated for individuals of Korean descent. Between 2007 and late 2011, immigration logs show he crossed the border between China and South Korea 8 separate times. His existence in South Korea was highly nomadic and restricted to the margins of the economy. He secured employment exclusively in the manual labor sector. He worked as a day laborer, carrying heavy construction materials, cement, steel rebar, and bricks, on building sites across multiple provinces, including Jeju Island and the industrial zones of Gyeongsang-namdo. By October 2010, Oh established a permanent residence in the Jidong neighborhood of Suwon, located in Gyeonggi Province. The physical demands of his daily labor had completely altered his biological framework over the decades. The small, frail child from Inner Mongolia had developed into a heavily muscled adult male. He now stood 1.78 meters tall and weighed 83 kilograms. He possessed the physical mass required to physically dominate others, completely inverting the power dynamic of his youth. Despite his physical growth, his social integration remained non-existent. The Jidong neighborhood consists of a dense grid of low-rise brick buildings, narrow concrete alleys, and cheap rental units. Oh occupied a small, low-rent studio apartment within this grid. He lived in absolute isolation. He did not participate in local community events, did not form friendships with native South Korean citizens, and lacked any support network to process the daily friction of his existence.
I work, I sleep. People look right through me, like I'm dirt. But out here, in the dark, I decide who matters.
In forensic psychology, O represents a prime subject for strain theory. This criminological concept outlines the psychological friction occurring when an individual adopts societal goals, such as financial accumulation, but lacks the accepted social mechanisms to achieve the accompanying status and respect. Over years of grueling labor, Oh managed to save approximately 7 million won. However, his socioeconomic position remained at the absolute bottom of the South Korean hierarchy. He was a foreign manual laborer performing undesirable tasks, separated from his family, and largely ignored by the host population. The discrepancy between his financial savings and his invisible social status generated chronic psychological tension. Standard individuals utilize communication skills, hobbies, or social networks to process frustration and de-escalate stress. Oh lacked these faculties. He internalized these external pressures completely. The internalized tension metabolized into a generalized, suppressed hostility directed at the surrounding environment. Criminal profilers assessing O's behavioral data identified a distinct victim to offender progression. His childhood victimization and adult social marginalization fueled a latent requirement to exert absolute authority over another living entity. To correct his internal deficit of power, he required a subject weaker than himself. Women walking alone at night presented the optimal target profile for this psychological demand. The objective was not merely sexual gratification, but the complete subjugation of a weaker individual to repair his fractured ego. The evening of April 11 was the convergence point of this decades-long psychological distortion. At his residence in Suwon, O consumed alcohol. The introduction of ethanol into his bloodstream chemically suppressed the prefrontal cortex of his brain, disabling his baseline impulse control and risk assessment capabilities. He exited his apartment to dispose of household waste. He did not leave the unit with the premeditated objective of homicide. His initial intent, formed upon stepping into the alley, was the opportunistic exertion of sexual dominance. He sought to temporarily subjugate a female target to balance his internal perception of inadequacy. He selected the concrete utility pole positioned 50 meters from his door. He waited in the blind spot of the street illumination. He executed the physical takedown of the 28-year-old factory worker in under 15 seconds, dragging her mass across the threshold and engaging the lock. However, The operational parameters inside the studio apartment shifted rapidly. The chosen target did not comply with the established script of his control fantasy. Kwok fought back with high-intensity physical resistance. The resistance disrupted his mechanical control of the environment. When she secured herself behind the internal wooden door, she deployed her mobile phone. The dialing of the 112 emergency sequence fundamentally altered the trajectory of the event. The cellular device connected to the central dispatch network, data packets carrying her voice, began transmitting from the small locked bedroom directly to a communications hub containing 20 active personnel. The closed system of the apartment was breached by a live audio feed. South Korea utilizes a centralized 3-digit emergency dispatch number, 112. It functions identically to the 911 system in the United States, routing civilian distress calls to regional police communication centers. At 10:50 p.m. on April 1, the digital switchboard at the Gyeonggi Provincial Police Agency illuminated with an incoming connection. The call was routed to a male police officer currently manning the dispatch terminal. This individual possessed limited tenure and lacked experience in high-priority crisis management.
I am being attacked by a stranger. I'm in a house between Jidong Elementary and the Motgal Playground. Please, he's breaking the door.
Kwok delivered her geographic coordinates with extreme precision. She identified 2 fixed, permanent landmarks within the Suwon municipal grid, an elementary school and a public playground. She clearly stated the nature of the emergency, categorizing the event as an ongoing sexual assault perpetrated by an unknown male assailant. She explicitly specified her location as being inside a residential structure, not in an outdoor public space. The physical parameters of the threat were established within the first several seconds of the transmission.
Are you saying you are being sexually assaulted right now? You don't know the exact address?
The standard operating procedure for an active, in-progress violent felony dictates immediate geographical targeting and the rapid dispatch of the closest patrol units. Instead, the operator initiated a line of redundant questioning. Meanwhile, the audio feed from the apartment documented the escalating physical breach. The wooden door separating Kwok from Oh Wan-chun failed under repeated physical impacts. The structural barrier collapsed, granting Oh access to the bedroom. The cellular phone was dislodged from Kwok's grip and dropped onto the floorboards. The device remained active. The microphone continued to process and transmit the acoustic data directly to the police dispatch center. The total duration of the recorded audio transmission was exactly 7 minutes and 36 seconds. During this chronological window, approximately 20 police personnel were present in the communications hub. The audio file captured from the floor of the apartment contained a dense sequence of physical violence. The microphone recorded the distinct acoustic signature of industrial packing tape being unspooled from its cardboard core. It registered the specific heavy sounds of blunt force impacts against a human body. Foremost in the audio spectrum were Kwok's vocalizations.
Please forgive me. I was wrong, sir. Why are you doing this to me? Please spare me.
Kwok utilized pleading and submission in an attempt to de-escalate the physical violence. Her verbal statements clearly indicated an asymmetrical power dynamic between an aggressor and an unwilling captive. The recording also captured Oh Wan-chun's voice directly addressing her.
I don't believe anything you say.
Despite the clear audio evidence of a physical struggle, the tearing of adhesive tape, and explicit pleas for survival, the personnel at the 112 dispatch center formed an alternate operational hypothesis. Cognitive bias played a critical role in this systemic failure. The operators anchored onto the initial assumption of a domestic dispute. In behavioral psychology, anchoring bias causes individuals to rely too heavily on the first piece of information or the initial assumption they form. Once the operator classified the incident as a marital argument, all subsequent acoustic data, the screams, the tape, the breaking wood, was filtered through that incorrect lens. They categorized the incoming data as a standard conflict between a husband and wife, a classification that carries a much lower priority tier within law enforcement dispatch protocols. Because the threat level was not elevated to a critical status, the transmission of data from the dispatch center to the field units was flawed. When the dispatcher relayed the assignment to the patrol vehicles operating in the Paul Dalgu district, a crucial piece of geographic intelligence was omitted. The operator failed to inform the field officers that the victim explicitly stated she was located inside a house. This omission fundamentally altered the search parameters for the responding officers. Furthermore, law enforcement agencies in South Korea during 2012 operated under strict privacy regulations regarding cellular location tracking. Officers were legally prohibited from immediately accessing a caller's exact global positioning system coordinates without navigating a complex authorization process. Consequently, the dispatch center could only provide the field units with the location of the nearest cellular transmission tower, routing Kwok's call. This technological limitation produced a search radius containing an enormous margin of error, spanning several hundred meters to over a kilometer from the actual crime scene. The field units arrived in the general vicinity of the Motgal Playground and Jidong Elementary School because they had not been informed that the victim was confined within a residential structure. Their search patterns focused entirely on exterior environments. The Jidong neighborhood comprises a high-density architectural layout. Hundreds of similar low-rise brick structures are packed tightly together, separated by narrow alleys. Finding one specific unit without an exact address requires systematic physical verification. Officers must knock on doors and clear individual spaces. The patrol units elected not to perform this protocol. They illuminated dark alleys with spotlights, swept empty dirt lots, and visually inspected the open recreational spaces of the playground. They operated under the assumption that a domestic dispute had spilled out into the street. To avoid waking the civilian population during the late hour, the patrols maintained a low profile, driving their vehicles at low speeds and rolling down their windows to listen passively for external disturbances. The physical reality was entirely different. Kwok was contained behind the locked metal door of Oh Wan-chun's ground floor apartment, located mere blocks from where the police vehicles were currently idling. At the dispatch center, the audio connection from Kwok's phone eventually terminated. The operators did not issue an escalated alert. The search continued at a standard non-emergency pace. The misinterpretation of the acoustic data and the failure to relay the interior location parameter created a massive operational blind spot. Inside the apartment, the introduction of the 112 emergency call had forced Oh Wan-chun to alter his primary objective. The sexual assault was aborted. The goal shifted entirely to the permanent silencing of the witness to protect his freedom and his accumulated capital. The physical struggle ceased during the early morning hours. The victim was deceased. Oh moved the remains into the tiled washroom. He selected his cutting implements. As he began the meticulous process of separating the biological tissue, the police patrol units remained actively deployed in the surrounding neighborhood, operating within hundreds of meters of his location. The sun had not yet risen. The first incisions were made on the bathroom floor while the patrol cars slowly circled the adjacent streets. The physical evidence left on that bathroom floor allowed forensic behavioral analysts to reconstruct the precise cognitive shift that occurred in Oh Wan-chun's mind leading up to those incisions. When Kwok connected to the 112 emergency dispatch, the parameters of the encounter instantly changed. The initial objective of sexual assault was no longer a viable operation. Oh recognized that law enforcement personnel were now an active variable in his immediate environment. He engaged in a rapid, highly utilitarian risk assessment. The calculus in his frontal lobe centered entirely on self-preservation and financial retention. Oh had accumulated a total of approximately 7 million won. This capital was generated through years of intense, repetitive manual labor on construction sites across South Korea, carrying cement and steel rebar. If he was apprehended by the police for an attempted sexual assault, he faced immediate incarceration. Due to his status, As a foreign migrant worker, a criminal conviction guaranteed subsequent deportation back to China. More critically to O, the arrest would result in the permanent forfeiture of his financial assets. The 7 million won represented the entirety of his life savings and his only tangible metric of success. In criminological terms, O transitioned from reactive aggression to instrumental aggression. The victim was no longer a target for physical subjugation. She was a liability directly threatening his capital. The preservation of his money superseded the preservation of her biological life.
If I let her walk out that door, they take my money. They take everything I built in this country. I cannot let them take the money.
With his primary objective recalibrated, O executed the murder with absolute physical efficiency. He did not act out of a blind, uncontrollable rage. The forensic pathology reports indicate a measured, deliberate application of lethal force. O retrieved a heavy metal wrench from his living quarters. He approached Kwok and delivered 2 severe downward strikes directly to her cranium. The blunt force trauma instantly incapacitated her, removing her ability to physically resist or vocalize further distress. To ensure the complete termination of respiration, O dropped the metal tool and utilized his bare hands. He positioned his fingers and palms around the circumference of her neck. He applied sustained manual compression to her trachea and carotid arteries. The act of manual strangulation requires significant continuous physical exertion for several minutes. O maintained this localized pressure until all biological functions ceased. The victim's cardiovascular system failed, and oxygen deprivation resulted in brain death. The estimated time of death was established by medical examiners at approximately 5 a.m. on the morning of April 2nd. Following the cessation of life, a standard offender typically exhibits one of 2 psychological responses. The first is immediate panic, resulting in a disorganized flight from the crime scene. The second is overwhelming physiological revulsion, often manifesting as vomiting, hyperventilation, or physical collapse when the reality of a homicide registers in the brain. O Won Chun exhibited neither response. His central nervous system remained completely regulated. He grasped the deceased by her extremities and pulled the biological mass across the floorboards of the main room. He crossed the threshold into the small, attached bathroom. The bathroom measured only a few square meters. It was constructed with hard, non-porous ceramic tiles and featured a central floor drain. It provided an optimal environment for fluid containment and biohazard management. O did not procure specialized industrial equipment for the next phase. He selected standard, commercially available kitchen knives directly from his own living space. What transpired over the next 6 hours stands as a profound case study in severe psychopathic detachment. O knelt on the cold tiled floor and initiated the dismemberment. The human body is a highly complex, durable structure. Separating its components requires significant physical endurance, a rudimentary understanding of joint anatomy, and a complete absence of psychological empathy. O possessed the physical strength from his years of manual labor. The psychological void allowed him to treat the human remains identically to processed animal tissue.
The perpetrator demonstrated an emotional paralysis that defies standard human neurobiology. To occupy a closed room with a victim for 6 continuous hours, performing this level of manual dismantling without a spike in heart rate or a break in physical concentration indicates a complete absence of the neural pathways responsible for human empathy.
He began by systematically separating the dermal layers and the muscular tissue from the skeletal frame. He utilized the sharp edge of the blade to sever tendons and ligaments, effectively dismantling the structural integrity of the joints. He scraped the bones clean of all connective tissue. Once the soft tissue was completely isolated, he did not simply hack the mass into random, large sections to expedite the process. Instead, he utilized the kitchen knives to section the flesh into uniform, identical pieces. The forensic reconstruction later cataloged exactly 358 separate fragments of flesh. He also separated the skeletal structure into 29 distinct bone segments. The precision of the cuts was highly systematic. Each piece of tissue was relatively uniform in dimension, demonstrating a repetitive mechanical motion that lasted for hours. This uniformity was not an aesthetic choice, it was a strict operational requirement. O needed to dispose of the biological material without drawing visual attention from his immediate neighbors or the local sanitation workers. Large, irregularly shaped objects distort the outer lining of standard plastic garbage bags, creating suspicious outlines that invite inspection. By reducing the mass into small, uniform blocks, the material would settle evenly at the bottom of the receptacles. This technique mirrors the physical properties and appearance of standard, heavy household food waste. As the morning hours progressed, he transitioned to the packaging phase. He acquired 14 separate plastic receptacles, consisting primarily of standard black trash bags and a few personal travel bags. He systematically transferred the biological material into the bags. He evenly distributed the 358 pieces of flesh and the 29 bone segments among the 14 containers, carefully managing the weight distribution so no single bag would tear under the heavy load. He securely tied the plastic openings shut, sealing the contents and minimizing external odor. By late morning, the manual labor was complete. O aligned the 14 plastic bags on the blood-stained tiles of the washroom floor. He remained inside the apartment, coexisting in a confined space with the packaged remains. He did not attempt to clean the primary crime scene in the bedroom, nor did he immediately attempt to transport the bags outside into the daylight. He simply waited inside the quiet structure, his primary objective of asset protection seemingly achieved. Just a few meters away, beyond the walls of the studio apartment, the external environment remained in constant motion. The morning commute had begun. Pedestrians walked the narrow concrete alleys of the Jidong neighborhood. Delivery vehicles navigated the streets. Unbeknownst to Oh Wanchun, a single, external variable was about to intersect with his perfectly controlled environment. A resident in the immediately adjacent building picked up their telephone. They dialed a number to make a civilian report regarding a loud noise they had heard through the walls hours earlier. While that morning's civilian report would eventually connect to the switchboard, the official law enforcement response during the preceding night had already dictated the outcome of the incident. Outside the physical walls of Oh Wanchun's ground floor unit, a parallel timeline of systemic operational failure occurred. The physical distance separating the victim from the dispatched police units measured only in the hundreds of meters. The operational distance, however, was insurmountable. The Jidong neighborhood in the Paldalgu district is characterized by high-density urban architecture. The sector consists of tightly packed, low-rise brick residential structures separated by narrow concrete alleys. Navigating and securing this specific environment requires precise geographic data. When the regional dispatch center deployed patrol vehicles to the sector, they transmitted a fundamentally incomplete data packet. During the 7-minute and 36-second emergency call, Kwok explicitly stated she was contained inside a house. The active 1 or 12 operator failed to relay this specific architectural parameter to the responding field units. This single data omission completely altered the search matrix. Because the officers in the field did not possess the data point indicating an interior location, they formulated a search pattern based exclusively on external environments. They physically bypassed the dense rows of brick buildings housing hundreds of closed doors. Instead, they directed their vehicles toward open spaces. They focused their searchlights on empty dirt lots, municipal parks, and the open perimeter of the Motgal playground. The technological limitations of South Korean law enforcement in 2012 compounded this human error. The responding units could not pinpoint the exact origin of the cellular transmission. Under the privacy legislation active at that time, police officers were legally prohibited from executing a direct global positioning system trace on a civilian mobile device without navigating a complex, time-consuming warrant authorization process. This legal framework was strictly designed to protect citizens from unwarranted state surveillance. However, in the context of an active crisis, it functioned as a critical operational barrier. Without the exact GPS coordinates, the dispatch center relied entirely on standard cell tower triangulation. This method does not identify the physical location of the mobile device itself. It only identifies the physical location of the telecommunications tower receiving the signal from the device. By measuring the signal strength across multiple nearby towers, technicians can create a polygon of probability on a map. In a dense urban center like Suwon, this polygon generates a massive geographic search radius containing a severe margin of error. The field units were assigned a search grid spanning from several hundred meters to over a full kilometer away from the actual crime scene. Within this radius lay thousands of individual residences.
The cell tower ping gives us a massive radius. We can't access her exact GPS without a warrant. Just keep your eyes on the alleys. Maybe they cooled off and went home.
The field units operated under the dispatcher's flawed initial assessment that the incident was a standard domestic dispute between a married couple. This specific classification carries a low priority status within standard police operating procedures. Consequently, the physical tactics employed by the patrol units were entirely passive. The officers did not dismount their vehicles. They did not initiate a systematic grid search on foot. They did not approach individual residences to knock on doors or visually verify the welfare of the occupants. Instead, they operated their marked patrol cars at low speeds through the district. They lowered their windows to listen for ambient acoustic disturbances, relying on the assumption that a domestic argument would produce external noise. By this time, Oh Won-chun had already incapacitated Kwok with blunt force trauma to the cranium. The interior of the ground floor unit was silent. The passive exterior search yielded zero acoustic data. The police vehicles simply drove past the structure containing the crime scene. As the hours progressed, the failure of the official response prompted civilian intervention. Kwok's older sister was notified of the missing person status and the initial distress call. Recognizing the lack of progress, she traveled directly to the Jidong neighborhood to initiate an independent civilian foot patrol. She navigated the same dark alleys and concrete structures the police were assigned to secure. She searched the environment without a radio, without a weapon, and without institutional support. The chronological timeline reached 3:10 a.m. on April 2nd. Inside the apartment, Oh Won-chun was executing the dismemberment phase of the homicide, separating biological tissue with standardized kitchen tools. Outside, Kwok's sister walked into a surface parking lot located adjacent to a local supermarket. She observed a marked police patrol vehicle parked stationary in the lot. She approached the exterior of the vehicle and looked through the glass windows. She observed two uniformed police officers occupying the front seats. These individuals were officially assigned to the active search grid for her sister. Both officers were asleep. In forensic behavioral analysis, the physiological state of the responders serves as a direct indicator of institutional communication. The human central nervous system operates on two primary tracks. The sympathetic nervous system controls the fight or flight response, elevating the heart rate, increasing adrenaline, and expanding pupil dilation during a crisis. The parasympathetic nervous system controls the rest and digest functions, lowering the heart rate, reducing respiration, and enabling sleep. The fact that these officers achieved a state of parasympathetic dominance confirms that the dispatch center completely failed to communicate a lethal threat level. The officers did not perceive an active emergency. They perceived downtime. Kwok's sister engaged physically with the vehicle. She knocked on the glass window to initiate contact. The officers awoke. She verbally questioned their inaction, directly asking why they were resting while an active search for a missing woman was supposed to be underway. The response she received lacked any professional urgency or basic operational accountability. The officers provided a dismissive verbal statement. They informed her that other units were actively searching the perimeter and instructed her not to worry. They did not exit the vehicle to assist her foot patrol. They did not utilize their radio equipment to request a status update from the dispatch center. Following this brief interaction through the rolled-down window, The officers closed their eyes and returned to their resting state. The sister was left standing alone in the asphalt parking lot, observing the sleeping authorities. The physical distance between the resting law enforcement personnel and the bathroom where Oh Wan-chun continued his meticulous manual labor was negligible. The official shield designed to protect the civilian population from violence had completely fractured, leaving a single locked door as the only barrier between the quiet street and the organized mechanical destruction occurring inside. Sunlight illuminated the Jidong neighborhood. The chronological timeline advanced to the morning of April 2nd. The physical perimeter established by the Regional Dispatch Center remained unchanged. Police units continued to circle the broad, inaccurate radius dictated by the cell tower ping. The dense grid of low-rise brick buildings stood unsearched. Inside his ground floor unit, Oh Wan-chun maintained his operational focus. He was securing the biological material into the final plastic receptacles. At approximately 11:50 a.m., the communication terminal at the 112 Dispatch Center received a new civilian transmission. This input did not originate from the active field units or the ongoing missing person search. It originated from a resident occupying the architectural structure immediately adjacent to Oh's apartment. The layout of these rental units features shared, thin masonry walls. Acoustic energy transfers easily between the interior spaces.
I am calling to report a disturbance. The unit next to mine. I heard a loud argument earlier, a lot of yelling between a man and a woman. It sounded violent.
This civilian report contained the critical geographic data point the dispatcher failed to extract 7 hours prior, a specific residential address. The dispatch center transmitted the new coordinates to the patrol units. The search radius collapsed from a kilometer-wide polygon down to a single brick building. Multiple police vehicles converged on the specific alleyway. Officers dismounted and approached the exterior wooden door of Oh's ground floor apartment. The responding officers did not possess a key. They executed a forced physical breach of the entry point. The hardware failed, and law enforcement personnel entered the primary living space at exactly 11:50 a.m. The visual data processed by the lead officers was immediate and stark. The primary room contained clear physical indicators of a violent struggle. A heavy metal wrench rested on the floorboards. Strips of industrial packing tape were discarded nearby. Cellular equipment belonging to the victim remained on the ground. Blood evidence was present on the horizontal surfaces. The officers advanced past the primary living space and approached the attached, tiled washroom. Oh Wan-chun was positioned inside this secondary space. He was actively completing his objective. He was manipulating the final plastic bags containing the sectioned biological material. In standard apprehension scenarios, an offender caught actively managing a homicide scene initiates an acute stress response. The sympathetic nervous system triggers either a physical assault against the officers or a rapid flight attempt. Oh exhibited zero baseline physiological elevation. He did not drop his tools. He did not attempt to exit the window or push past the tactical entry team. He simply stopped his manual labor and looked at the entering personnel. His physiological state appeared entirely stable. He offered no physical resistance as the officers moved forward and applied steel restraints to his wrists. The interior of the bathroom functioned as a containment zone. The physical evidence was meticulously organized. 14 plastic bags, comprising standard black garbage receptacles and a few travel bags, were aligned on the ceramic tiles. Officers secured the perimeter and requested the immediate deployment of forensic pathology units. The National Forensic Service deployed a specialized team to process the site. The biological recovery required 14 separate forensic experts to catalog the contents of the bags. The inventory process revealed a high level of mechanical repetition. Oh had utilized standard kitchen knives to systematically dismantle the human structure. The forensic technicians documented exactly 358 separate pieces of flesh. They documented 29 distinct skeletal segments. The analysis of the cuts provided direct behavioral evidence. The incisions were not jagged or frantic. They displayed a uniform, measured consistency. This physical uniformity confirmed that the perpetrator operated without psychological distress or temporal urgency. He spent approximately 6 hours executing this task in a confined space measuring only a few square meters. The biological material was packed to ensure equal weight distribution across the 14 bags. This prevented the thin plastic from rupturing during transport. O was extracted from the apartment and transported to the regional police headquarters. He was placed in a secure interrogation room. Standard protocol in South Korea dictates that suspects are provided basic nutritional sustenance and are not subjected to physical coercion during questioning.
You are giving me food? I do not understand. When the police in China questioned me, they beat me. Why are you not beating me?
His verbal statements to the detectives demonstrated a complete absence of remorse. He did not inquire about the victim's family. He did not express regret. His primary cognitive focus was analyzing the procedural differences between the Chinese and South Korean law enforcement systems. He viewed the interrogation strictly as an operational transaction. As the primary detectives began recording his official statement, O initiated a pre-calculated defense strategy. He began constructing a fabricated timeline of events, claiming the encounter started as an accidental physical collision on the street. He assumed the police lacked external visual evidence. He believed he could manipulate the narrative to reduce the legal severity of the charges. However, back at the crime scene, the forensic pathologists were completing their initial assessment of the 358 identical pieces of flesh. The sheer mechanical precision of the cuts did not align with standard evidence disposal. The uniform dimensions and the highly systematic removal of tissue presented a statistical anomaly. The analysts formulated a new hypothesis. The physical evidence suggested this was not a spontaneous cover-up by a panicked laborer. The data indicated the perpetrator possessed specialized processing experience, raising a deeply unsettling question about his true economic objectives and whether the 14 bags were intended for a specific buyer. The 14 plastic bags remained in the custody of the National Forensic Service, while detectives initiated the formal questioning of Oh Wan-chun. He was seated inside a standard interrogation room at the regional police headquarters. The physical space was sparse, containing only a table, chairs, and audio-visual recording equipment. The investigators presented him with the preliminary charges. They required an official statement detailing his sequence of actions on the night of April 1. O demonstrated a high level of cognitive control during these sessions. He did not exhibit the erratic behavior or the disorganized speech patterns typical of offenders experiencing post-incident trauma. Instead, he deployed a calculated legal defense strategy. He understood the severe judicial distinction between a premeditated abduction and a spontaneous physical altercation resulting in a fatality. To minimize his legal liability, he constructed a fabricated chronological timeline.
It was an accident. We bumped shoulders on the street. She started yelling, so I just pulled her inside to quiet her down. I didn't plan any of this.
He delivered this specific narrative with complete physiological stability. He repeated the exact sequence of events across 4 separate multi-hour interrogation sessions. His baseline remained so consistent that he successfully passed a preliminary polygraph examination administered by police technicians. The biometric sensors recording his heart rate, respiration, and galvanic skin response registered 0 fluctuations when he stated the encounter was an unplanned accident. His ability to defeat the polygraph further confirmed his severe psychopathic traits. He possessed no internal moral conflict regarding his actions, allowing his autonomic nervous system to remain entirely regulated while deceiving state authorities. However, modern law enforcement does not rely solely on biometric data or suspect testimony. South Korean urban infrastructure utilizes a high density of closed-circuit television cameras, commonly referred to as CCTV. These digital recording devices are mounted on utility poles, commercial storefronts, and residential buildings to monitor public streets and narrow alleys. Detectives established a 500-meter search radius around O's ground floor apartment. They canvassed the district and extracted the hard drives from 7 different security cameras positioned along Kwok's known pedestrian route. The digital forensics unit reviewed the video files. They located a specific camera angle covering the alleyway adjacent to the Jidong Elementary School. They scrubbed the timeline to 10:40 p.m. on April 1. The visual data completely dismantled O's fabricated narrative. The black and white footage presented a clear, objective record of the environment. Oh Won-chun was visible on the screen. He was not walking. He was standing entirely stationary behind a concrete utility pole. He maintained this position, utilizing the structure to mask his physical presence from the approaching pedestrian. The camera recorded Kwok entering the frame. As she passed the pole, there was no accidental shoulder collision. Oh executed a sudden lateral lunge. He applied overwhelming physical force to intercept her path, shoved her to the asphalt, and dragged her mass toward his door. The entire sequence, from the initial physical contact to the moment they disappeared from the camera's field of view, spanned exactly 13 to 14 seconds. Detectives transported a video monitor into the interrogation room. They played the digital file for Oh Won-chun, confronted with undeniable visual evidence of his premeditation. His defense strategy collapsed. He officially amended his statement, admitting to the targeted abduction and the subsequent homicide to prevent the victim from alerting the authorities. The investigation transitioned from the police department to the judicial system. In June 2012, the primary trial commenced at the Suwon District Court. The prosecution submitted the finalized autopsy data generated by the 14 forensic pathologists. The judicial panel reviewed the physical parameters of the dismemberment. The documentation highlighted the 358 distinct pieces of flesh and the 29 separated bones. The presiding judges analyzed the operational mechanics of the crime scene. In standard forensic profiles, an offender dismembers a body strictly for concealment and transportation. The goal is to reduce the mass as quickly as possible, often resulting in jagged cuts and the splintering of bone structure. O's actions deviated entirely from this baseline. He utilized 6 hours to perform surgical-level separations of the dermal and muscular tissue. He produced uniform, identically sized blocks of material. This severe behavioral anomaly prompted the lower court to introduce a highly disturbing hypothesis into the official legal record. The judges postulated that the dismemberment was not a method of concealment, but a method of commercial production. The court formally suspected that Oh Won-chun operated as a local supplier for an illicit black market network, specifically the illegal trade of human meat. To understand the gravity of this accusation, one must examine the socio-political context of the region. South Korea and China share a complex maritime border across the Yellow Sea. Unverified rumors and urban legends regarding underground syndicates operating across this border frequently circulate in the public consciousness. These syndicates are often rumored to traffic in illegal narcotics, unregulated pharmaceuticals, and organic material. The court noted O's demographic profile. He was a migrant worker who crossed the border between Inner Mongolia and South Korea 8 separate times between 2007 and 2011. This travel history provided a theoretical logistical link to foreign networks. The lower court judges theorized that O targeted Kwok, executed the homicide, and utilized the 6-hour window to process the biological material to fulfill an active order. The 14 plastic bags were not intended for the local municipal waste disposal system. They were packaged and waiting for an incoming courier. Court transcripts are public records. The media immediately acquired the judge's official statements regarding the human meat trade theory. The hypothesis was broadcast across national television networks and published on the front pages of major print media outlets. The data transfer from the courtroom to the civilian population triggered a severe nationwide panic. Citizens in Suwon and across the Gyeonggi province reacted to the terrifying possibility that an organized syndicate was actively harvesting women from the local streets. The concept of a lone, psychopathic killer was horrifying. The concept of an industrial, black market flesh trade operating within their residential neighborhoods fractured the public's basic sense of physical security. Based heavily on the severity of this specific hypothesis and the extreme brutality of the physical evidence, the Suwon District Court issued its ruling. Oh Won-chun was found guilty and sentenced to death. The trial produced a conviction, but the judicial process was not finalized. The case was immediately elevated to the appellate courts for review. While the national media remained fixated on the unproven theories of cannibalism and international syndicates, a separate group of investigative journalists began analyzing a different data set. They filed legal requests to acquire the unedited audio files and the digital communication logs from the Regional 112 Dispatch Center. The information contained within those digital records was about to shift the national outrage from the actions of a single worker to the catastrophic, systemic collapse of the very institution designed to stop him. The digital files obtained by independent investigative journalists contained the exact time-stamped communication logs from the Gyeonggi Provincial Police Agency. These records directly contradicted the official narrative issued by law enforcement commanders. Recognizing their severe operational failure, regional police officials had engaged in a coordinated effort to alter the public record. Institutional self-preservation temporarily superseded factual transparency. On April 4, police administrators convened an official press conference. They issued a formal statement to the national media, claiming Kwok's emergency call lasted exactly 15 seconds. The spokespersons asserted that the victim was in a state of extreme panic and failed to provide any usable geographic data before the line disconnected, rendering a successful rescue impossible. This statement was a complete fabrication. Journalists possessing the actual communication logs confronted the department with the data discrepancies. Under immense pressure, the police convened a second press briefing the following day, April 5. They amended their official timeline.
We must correct the previous timeline. The call lasted 1 minute and 20 seconds. The victim dropped the phone. We did not disclose this initially because the remaining audio was simply too graphic and distressing to release to the public.
This revised statement was also a documented lie. By April 6, the unedited data was fully exposed to the South Korean public. The actual duration of the 112 connection was 7 minutes and 36 seconds. The records proved Kwok clearly and calmly identified 2 specific geographic landmarks. Furthermore, the logs revealed that for over 6 minutes after the cellular device hit the floorboards, active personnel inside the dispatch center listened to the physical assault without upgrading the priority tier of the response. The exposure of the unedited timeline triggered an immediate severe public reaction. The failure was no longer viewed as a tragic oversight. It was categorized as systemic incompetence compounded by active institutional deception. The structural hierarchy of the national police force collapsed under the weight of the data. The highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the country, National Police Agency Commissioner General Cho Hyun-oh, organized a final press conference. He issued a formal public apology and immediately resigned from his position to absorb the institutional accountability. Internal affairs investigations resulted in strict disciplinary actions against 14 individual officers directly involved in the dispatch and patrol failures. While the law enforcement apparatus fractured, the judicial system proceeded with the appellate review of Oh Won-chun. In October 2012, the Seoul High Court examined the physical evidence and the lower court's hypothesis regarding an international human meat trade. The appellate judges required objective, verifiable data to uphold the death penalty based on that specific theory. Financial investigators audited Oh's banking records. They found 0 incoming wire transfers, no unexplained cash deposits, and no financial anomalies, suggesting compensation from an illicit syndicate. Telecommunications experts analyzed his cellular history. They found 0 communications with known smugglers or black market brokers. The appellate court then analyzed the physical dimensions of the 358 biological fragments. Forensic profilers presented a highly pragmatic explanation for the uniformity of the cuts. O lived in a dense urban environment. Disposing of human remains requires circumventing municipal waste collection protocols. If O attempted to place large, intact skeletal segments into standard black plastic trash bags, the sharp edges would puncture the thin polyethylene material. Irregular shapes would stretch the bags, creating suspicious outlines. By reducing the biological material into small, identically sized blocks, O ensured the mass would settle evenly at the base of the plastic receptacles. This method mimicked the physical weight distribution and visual profile of standard, heavy household food waste, allowing for discreet disposal. The mechanical repetition observed at the crime scenes was not indicative of commercial processing. It was a utilitarian method of evidence destruction. The High Court concluded the human meat trade theory lacked any evidentiary foundation. The judges ruled that the dismemberment was strictly an extreme method of concealment. O's primary motive was instrumental. He executed the homicide to silence a witness, aiming to avoid incarceration and protect the $7 million he had accumulated through manual labor. Based on this revised legal framework, the appellate court commuted his death sentence. He received a final sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In January 2013, the Supreme Court of South Korea upheld this ruling. Oh Won-chun was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility in the Gyeongbuk region, where he will remain for the duration of his biological life. The operational failures documented on April 1 forced a complete structural overhaul of South Korea's emergency response protocols. Recognizing the lethal consequences of their privacy restrictions, the National Assembly drafted and passed the 112 location tracking law in late 2012. This legislation fundamentally altered the legal parameters for law enforcement. It granted dispatch operators the authority to immediately access exact GPS coordinates from civilian cellular devices during life-threatening emergencies, bypassing the previously required warrant authorization process. Simultaneously, Kwok's surviving family members initiated civil litigation against the South Korean government. Following a prolonged legal process spanning multiple courts, they were awarded financial compensation for the state's failure to protect a citizen. The legislative reforms and the civil settlement represent the official conclusion of the legal proceedings. The structural vulnerabilities in the emergency dispatch system were patched with new technological authorizations and revised operational protocols. However, analyzing the timeline of events yields a deeply unsettling forensic reality. Standard safety protocols dictate specific actions during a physical threat. Kwok executed every required survival measure with absolute precision. When confronted by a physically superior aggressor, she did not submit. She applied maximum physical resistance. She identified a tactical advantage, utilizing a momentary lapse in the attacker's proximity to secure a physical barrier. She engaged the internal locking mechanism of the wooden door. She immediately accessed a communication device and dialed the National Emergency Network. She delivered clear, concise geographic data. She identified the exact nature of the threat. She maintained the open audio connection even after the physical barrier failed and blunt force trauma was applied. She provided the state apparatus with all the necessary data required to execute an extraction. The horror of the Suwon dismemberment case does not solely reside in the psychology of a migrant laborer utilizing kitchen tools on a tiled bathroom floor. It resides in the collapse of the social contract. A citizen performed perfectly under extreme physiological stress. The institutional shield designed to protect her possessed the personnel, the vehicles, and the geographic proximity to intercept the threat. The system received the data. The system simply chose not to listen.